I've got Mike Clegg here. Hey, Mike. Thank you so much for taking the time. Just for everyone out there, Mike is a former professional footballer for Manchester United and head of strength and conditioning for Sunderland AFC, and current owner of Seed of Speed Athletic Center for Training. Now, I hope I got all that right, Mike, but feel free to correct me.
No, that's all correct, Lou, and thank you for the opportunity to come onto the first podcast for NeuroTracker, and I'm looking forward to the conversation and just seeing where it takes us.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, yeah, thanks to you as well. So let's just jump right in. I'd love if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background as a player and as a coach, and feel free to share any interesting anecdotal stories along the way.
Yeah, cool. And I suppose it will all wrap round into one big circle once we start and to where we finish, because as a young lad, I was really lucky to be in an environment where my father was really into sport. He was really into keep fit. And back in 1983, he opened a small little gym within the confines of a taekwondo and boxing club. And from that, I was lucky enough to be exposed to, good discipline, understanding how the body works, understanding how training over time, you can start to create adaptations in the body. And throughout that time, up until being 15, I was always very sporty. I went into the UK Championships at Olympic lifting. I come third in Great Britain, which was a good achievement back then.
You were an Olympic weightlifter?
Yes, I did Olympic lifting. That was our background, really.
Oh, wow.
My father got qualified through the British Weightlifting Association, and that's what he taught in schools. And ultimately, you sort of follow in your father's footsteps, and he was teaching me all the time. So I did a lot of Olympic lifting, the snatch and the clean and jerk, and I won the sort of the Northwest Championships, and I went into the National Championships. But that was a long way back. That was probably in 1992 when I was 15 years old.
Wow, I did not know that about you. I thought it was soccer since day one, based on the progression that we all saw. So yeah, well that's awesome.
Yeah, so that type of training, especially the second pull and generating force throughout the kinetic chain, for me was all something which had great crossover or transfer effect into my football. So when I was lucky enough to get scouted from Manchester United, they was like, you're not a bad player, but there's something different about you. And I ended up playing 6 games for the under-16s when I was still at school. And I was quite a late developer, really. And a lot of players were already been signed on by other football clubs with the team I was playing at. And I actually thought, I'm going to miss the boat here. And I actually applied to go to college, and I was thinking maybe going to university. But I got the opportunity, and I played 6 times for the under-16s, which it were then for Man United, and I got lucky enough to sign what was called an apprenticeship back then. So that took me from being 16 to 18. And throughout that time, being 16 to 18, I still trained with my dad. And back then, one of the keys, what really stood out to me, what links into the NeuroTracker further down, is my dad used to do a lot of speed training with me. But it wasn't so much the sense of speed training where you're working like with a sprint coach or working on technique. He did a lot of training where I was doing reactive training, and when I was doing this reactive training, he used to chuck in questions like, "What's 7 times 7? What's the capital of France?" And when I was doing this speed work, he also made me work my actual brain, so I was dual tasking. But when I went to Man United, I spent 2 years there in the academy. I was lucky enough to win the Youth Cup, which set me up to become a professional football player at Man United. And I ended up being there for 9 seasons. I was lucky enough to play in the first team under the managership of Alex Ferguson. And I was in the same team as the likes of David Beckham, Paul Scholes, and the class of 92. They were 2 years older than me. So it became a bit of a glass ceiling, but it was a great time to be there with a real good work ethic and an understanding of what is needed to be the best. And throughout that time, we won the championship many times, the Premier League, and we also won the Champions League in 1999. So it was an amazing time to be there. I've got so many stories. We probably can't fit it all into a small podcast. And,
No, no, no. And I'm sure that you have a ton, being in that level of elite company. So being that perhaps not everyone can, and you'll have to forgive the pun, bend it like Beckham. Did you find that some of that cognitive training or dual tasking that your dad had done with you was some of the thing or part of what helped you to compete at that level? Given that you're obviously that not everyone can be a David Beckham.
Yeah, I mean, with them players, they were world class, and ultimately that's what they become. But for somebody like me, who was probably more a player who had good fundamentals, I mean, when it comes to the strength and power, that's what set me apart, and that's what gave me the added layer. And I think the combination of that Olympic lifting and the cognitive process and helped me to get to my maximal, and that's where I got to. And I was never genetically blessed or skillful enough to kick on to really become a proper first team player. Even though I played 25, 30 times for the first team, and I was just old enough, so I would always look back at when my best times were, and that's where I was training with my father, and that's when I was expressing force and I was expressing cognitive training, which unfortunately it isn't actually practiced in football clubs or in elite sport very easy. And that's why post my playing career, once I retired and I started working with my father again back in our gym while he was still at Man United, he actually decided, we need to think about something which is going to be new. And this is when we decided that cognitive training is something that needed to be added into the overall training plan of elite athletes.
Absolutely. And you sort of jumped ahead into the next question I was going to ask. I just wanted to get an idea of how nowadays, either at Seed of Speed or at your dad's gym, how you're combining NeuroTracker training in an athletic setting.
Yeah, so first of all, the basics of what we wanted to try to achieve, probably good 15 years ago now was, what is going to be the next wave of elite training and where's it going to come from? Coaching in the UK got much better. Strength and conditioning, sports science become something which was standard in most football teams. So me and my father spent a fair bit of time trying to understand what was going to be next on the curve. And we took it back to the roots when I was a child and the questions he did. And we used to do these boxing drills and where he used to ask me questions and cognitively challenge me. And then we started to think about how can we bring this process to a wider stream audience. And ultimately, my father had a brainwave. We actually went over to America, watching baseball, watching American football, and we were trying to work out where does speed come from. And the father got in contact with Jocelyn Forbert, did some research, and he found out about the institute which he got over there in Canada. And he got a week off from Alex Ferguson. He went to see Alex Ferguson and said, "Boss, I think I've got something new for you. I think I've got something which might aid our players even more than what we got them already." And he went, "Cleggy, do whatever you need. If you think it can bring something better to our team, you go and find it out and bring it back." So ultimately, my dad went over to Canada, met Jocelyn, discussed his idea. At that moment in time, I think Jocelyn was just working with maybe people had neurological issues regarding just even walking or being in an environment which they found difficult, and he was working with this NeuroTracker system. And my dad could see that there could be a sporting application to this, and ultimately they decided to bring this as a sporting arm of NeuroTracker, and they actually got the first unit over to Manchester United training ground in Carrington, and that was the start of our journey with the NeuroTracker system.
Yeah, no. I mean, I've heard that story many times over. Actually, your father was in very many ways the genesis of the first sporting arm, as you mentioned. And to your point, that's what Jocelyn was doing. So he's, for anyone out there listening who might not know, Jocelyn Faubert is the founder of the NeuroTracker technology. And originally what he was doing with it was, as you mentioned, working with neurodegenerative diseases. So people who were suffering those sorts of ailments. And very quickly, I suppose your father had the eye to realize that if you apply some of these same techniques to somebody in an athletic setting who's not necessarily impaired but still looking to improve, to get that little extra edge on the field, then there's absolutely an application for it. So, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious what happens when Manchester United approaches you and asks you to change what you're doing for them. You say yes.
And what the great story about that is when he actually took it to Man United, it was a big curve system. It was quite elaborate, but we actually put the players through the system. And the correlation was fantastic, really, because what my dad thought intuitively actually came out with the results when he actually put them in the system. And he found that the players who were aware, the players who could see things clearer, or he intuitively thought that, the likes of Paul Scholes and the Roy Keanes and the Ruud van Nistelrooys, they actually come out top when it comes to the testing. Then some of the other players and the reserve team players and the players who didn't quite make it, they was actually further down on the scoreboard. So there's quite a decent correlation trying to work out, has this actually got any type of long-term development plans where we can start putting this into the reserve team and the youth team and the academy, where we can spot a young player who potentially has the neurological capability to be a first-team player, as long as we can still work on his skill and his speed and his strength and his power.
Absolutely. And that's what sort of runs counterintuitively, I think, to some of the maybe more North American style scouting that goes on, where they just want to pick the biggest guy out there. When in fact, when you look at some of the other players, across some of the sports that are more popular over here, like the NBA, for example, you've got guys like Steph Curry, who typically wouldn't get a second look from scouts because he's only 6'3", and the average height in the NBA is 6'8" now or something like that. But he's clearly got something, and I suppose maybe a proper opposite for him could be Messi, without trying to start any sort of cross-sport rivalries. These guys have something extra going on upstairs that really allows them to separate themselves. So having your dad know, or perhaps be able to intuitively guess that one person might have that over the other, and to see NeuroTracker corroborate that, I think is very interesting, and something that scouts are going to begin to use more often all over the world. I think these sorts of cognitive assessments above and beyond, okay, he's big and fast, we need him on our team.
Without doubt. And the great thing about football, and it's probably different to some other sports, is no matter whether you're tall, whether you're small, whether you're extremely got a high VO2 or a low VO2, all these elements become a part of the actual testing mix. And also the neurological training and the cognitive processing is in that. So that just becomes a part and parcel of your actual assessment of the players when they come into the club, or you might be scouting. So I think this will start to become a standard practice within elite sport. And again, the North American market is probably took this on a little bit more than the European market. But I'm a great believer that they will catch up at some point. And, in a few years' time, this will be standard practice. But, my father took it to Man United. He started working with certain players, and they certainly saw the benefit of doing the training. You get the initial learning effect. And again, what he found was it almost was like the activation of the muscles, which can be done in the gym. The activation of the brain helps to set up the rest of the training process. So what we like to do now within the gym and within our Seed of Speed Academy and gym in Manchester is we start with the brain. If you can turn that light switch on the brain, if you can get it to be understanding, get the cognitive function going, helping it to be alive and to be switched on. I think it ultimately turns on the rest of the system. That's why we've been called the Seed of Speed, and we took that idea from the NeuroTracker system and what it's trying to do. If you turn on the button inside the brain, the rest of the body will follow. And that is really our training philosophy. And from that, the type of training systems you can put in place are really quite exciting. And we always start with close NeuroTracker system, thinking about multiple tracking, thinking about peripheral vision, thinking about awareness, and really trying to get that buy-in or that understanding that training has started. And therefore, once they go into their warm-up, then go into the rest of their training plan, we think you definitely add in 5 or 6% of the performance outcome.
Yeah, and and 5 or 6%. I know that these clubs at the level they play at would die for just one. So that's fantastic. So is there anything to the average player, or perhaps the amateur player who's looking to improve, that you'd be able to impart to them in terms of how you think people should train to incorporate that sort of cognitive aspect to their training, without perhaps me asking you to give away your secrets at Seed of Speed? Yeah, anything to share for anyone out there who wants to incorporate a cognitive element to their training?
Apart from just using the NeuroTracker itself, which obviously sets you up in the right frame of mind, I think with all type of training, a lot of the time you need to be in the richest environment possible. So if you talk about training in a football sense or a soccer sense, that environment in itself is quite cognitively rich. You have multiple players, you have a ball, you're talking, you're communicating. But when you break it down, like we do as strength and conditioning or sports scientists, into an actual running drill or work in the gym, I think you've got to try and become creative. How do you make it so you're not just doing, say, 5 reps of a squat, then you're doing nothing for 3 minutes to recover? How can you add elements of cognitive training within the rest? And because what you're trying to match up ultimately is, the performance on the pitch. And you want to have some type of transfer from what you're doing in the gym to what you're doing on the court or the pitch. So a lot of the time, people train in individual segments. So we'll do some injury prevention work. We'll do some posterior chain work. We'll do some strength work. We'll do some power work. So we're great believers in splicing these training elements together and ultimately adding in challenges cognitively, whether that's using lights, whether that's using some type of kinesthetic or some type of visual or auditory stimulation. And it's just to challenge the athlete that even when you're in the gym, keep the environment rich, because ultimately I think, and we believe, that helps you to get in the flow state more often. And once you're in the flow state, you've got a better chance of achieving higher levels of performance.
Yeah, absolutely. So somewhat of a buffet of cognitive and sport related activity that you feel is relevant to the endeavor you're pursuing. So I'm happy you mentioned flow state. Do you think you could just talk a little bit about the concept of the flow state as well? Because that is huge, and perhaps not everyone knows about it.
Yeah, again, it's very simple that when you're first trying to learn something, your frontal cortex is taking so much information, it becomes really difficult to do something natural. So there's a massive learning curve, and the processing within that is quite overloading. But as you get better and it becomes a secondary function, you almost become automatic. You can therefore add layers of technical difficulty. But once you get into the flow state, when you can do something with ease and you can be in flow, in other words, you can do things without even thinking, whether it's a sprinting with the ball, whether it's dribbling, or even whether it's a gym situation. Once you get into that flow state, everything becomes easier. The body almost becomes one with its environment. We know when we speak to the best players, whether that's been Ronaldo or whether that's been the likes of the players at Manchester United or some very top players at Sunderland, and you ask them, what happened in that situation when you did something unbelievable, and they never quite know what happens. They talk about time slowing down or time speeding up, but ultimately they get into the right place at the right time, the ball arrives, and they execute the skill with absolute proficiency. If you try to say, break that down into a step-by-step function where you're using your brain, your frontal cortex to understand what you did, they will never be able to do it. They just, through practice, through endeavour, and through allowing it to become secondary in nature, that when they go into the pitch, they don't even know how it happened, and it happens. And ultimately, that's what all young players, amateur players, and professional players want to be in, because that is when you're at the best, when you're more efficient with the body and you can execute skill practice with efficiency without even knowing how or why it's happened.
Absolutely. And I think that ties into almost the concept of being in a meditative state or the overall concept of mindfulness. I think there's a bit of a misrepresentation of what people think athletes are doing before a match, where, people think that they've got their iPhone or their earpods in and they're blasting their pump up songs so that they can get ready. But I think it's quite the opposite at the professional level in that, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but from what I've understood, these guys are grounding themselves. They're trying to get into the zone mentally so that they can access that state. And when you're really not thinking about, like you said, sprinting with the ball in front of you or something like that, you've got a lot more cognitive space or cognitive juices to use towards something that is perhaps additional that would otherwise have been much more difficult, which allows you to excel and perform that much better.
Yeah, I think certain athletes will definitely have that state where they want to bring themselves down and be in a calming state because they're getting too over excited or stimulated, and there'll be other players who need the music to stimulate themselves. So again, that's two different variables which work both ways. When you talk about mindfulness and you're talking about meditation, I've been starting to do a lot of work with the NeuroTracker even within schools, and one of the big focus areas I've been trying to do is push on the ADHD within schools. And help children who really have learning deficits and issues regarding their own mental way of being, to try and help them to be in a relaxed state. And using the NeuroTracker as being the trigger point to help them to become more mindfulness and chilled out, so therefore they can perform better throughout the rest of the day. We've been doing a couple of pilot studies in the UK. Me and my friend Umesh, who's a teacher in a lot of primary schools and in senior schools, and this is a big project which we think is going to have a lot of legs, because the NeuroTracker, as much as it is a tool that can be used for performance, we also feel it can really help out in the youth and the sort of attentional deficit areas, because unfortunately this is becoming a bigger and bigger issue in the Western world, especially, children suffering with all these neurological issues, and we're hoping that NeuroTracker can be one of the devices to help bridge that gap.
Absolutely, and you've hit the nail on the head. It's funny that you mentioned that initiative, in that we actually have a product that's very recently been developed, that's designed specifically for students with these afflictions. Although you're very familiar, I'm sure, with our performance version, this has a user interface that's designed to work a little bit with a younger population, so it's a little bit friendlier. But you're absolutely right. This generation is one that sees a text message and then is on Facebook and then checks their email. There's not really many moments where they're focusing and honing their attention on one thing for a very long period of time, at least comparatively speaking to the generations that preceded them. So I think absolutely, and kudos to you for seeing the value of that potential crossover, because it's rampant in the younger generations. Absolutely.
No, I totally agree. And again, I'm always looking for, when I was in high level sports, you're trying to help people perform to their highest level. What I'm doing now not at Sunderland, I'm trying to look at the wider public and think, through my education, through my experiences, how can I offer something to the wider general public which can really benefit from them, benefit to them. And that's a lot of the speeches and motivational talks I do. I go doing corporate wellness, businesses, I go speaking at schools, and I try and relay their story of what I've done and the work with Alex Ferguson, Man United, and all the managers at Sunderland, the like of Sam Allardyce, who's become the England manager, with Roy Keane, with Dick Advocaat, who's been the national coach for Holland, and many, many others. And I've had great experiences seeing managers teach and tutor the students and the football players and the staff members in different ways. But I think engagement and understanding and education is a way which has got to be from the top down. Sometimes it's through governments, but it's got to be people who've been in the field. They understand what it's like to be at the high level, and how can we now disseminate this information to the wider public. And if I see opportunities for the NeuroTracker where that can fit in and help, 100% I'm telling people about it, because I think this is a product which can help many, many people in the wider community.
Well, that's fantastic. And I mean, I definitely follow you on social, and I know that you very recently, was it Holland that you were in? I know you were asked to go somewhere a little bit further north from where you typically are, and feel free to correct me, but you went on a bit of a speaking tour recently of some kind, no?
Yeah, well, I was lecturing. Yeah, so lecturing.
Okay.
So I've done a fair few different lectures. I've been down to a prestigious university called Middlesex University, where I did a keynote speech there. I've just been to Poland presenting on Olympic lifting and program design. I've done more recently just wrote a course which will be advertised. I'll be taking that around the world from sort of May, June, July onwards, which is strength and conditioning for soccer and for football. And I go to lots of schools, and especially my local area in Manchester, and that's where I don't charge. I go in there and give my time for free, because I think it's important that people see that even though I was from a very poor area in Manchester, I still managed to, through hard work, endeavour, discipline, good luck in the sense I had a very forward-looking father, and good luck in the sense I got the opportunity to play at Man United, and now I want to be back in that environment and helping these people out. So yeah, I'm going to be talking throughout the world, doing different projects. Next week, I'm about to start my own YouTube channel, so that'll be an exciting adventure for me. And again, it'll be talking about sports. It'll be talking about football, it'd be talking about health and fitness and strength and conditioning, and all these things wrapped together very nicely. Without doubt, sport is the penetration to people's lives about how to be fit and how to be healthy, whether that's through nutrition, whether that's going to the gym or just going for a walk, understanding how the body works. So I feel like I'm in a very privileged position where I can help, hopefully, lots and lots of people regarding their own well-being.
Well, that's great. So I mean, do you know what the name of the YouTube channel is going to be called yet? And if you have some social handles, either Twitter or otherwise that you'd like to share, so that people can follow along.
Well, I'm very new to all this, but on LinkedIn and on Twitter and Instagram, it's Michael Clegg and it's at Seed of Speed. My YouTube channel, I imagine, will give it the same name. So again, it'll be Michael Clegg and it'll be at Seed of Speed or Seed of Speed 1. And we'll just see where it takes us. And hopefully I'm going to have it where people can ask me questions and I'll be answering people's questions, whether it's sport related or health and well-being. And who knows, in the future, I might talk about all different types of things. We'll probably get into that in a later date, but I'm very excited. It's something new. I'm definitely stepping out of my comfort zone. It's something which I don't really enjoy doing, but it's something which I think if I've got a voice, I've got an opinion, and I've got good information, why not do it?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I know I'll be looking for the YouTube channel, and I mean, stepping out of your comfort zone sounds like something that your dad taught you about in terms of just the training approach when you were younger. So I think that's one of the best ways that we grow. And just to touch quickly on your point about finding a way to stay fit or to guide yourself by sport or through sport. I can't ever claim to say that I played at the same level that you did, but that's been something, a strong current for me in my life. You know, it's without sport and the camaraderie that you develop with teammates that you can really develop, not only physically and staying fit mentally, but just across the board in terms of the social aspect that it delivers as well. Listen, all that to say, we've kind of run out of time, but I want to thank you so much, Mike, for taking the time. And I really look forward to maybe having you on again.
No problem. Thank you very much. And I wish all the viewers all the best for 2019. It's been a pleasure to be on the podcast, and good luck.
The pleasure was ours. So take care, Mike, and we'll talk again soon, I'm sure.